When Edith Marshall turned 75, she took a cruise to the Bahamas. She was an older woman with no material possessions and dressed in very simple clothes, although her ticket was for a luxury suite. When a millionaire humiliated her in front of the other passengers, she revealed what she was doing there and who her son was, leaving everyone speechless. Miss Marshall had never been on a cruise before. Despite living in Florida, a state famous for its beaches, she hadn't been to the coast in years. With the economic downturn and her retirement, life had become problematic in recent years, making it difficult for her to enjoy it as much. She paid her taxes and maintained the house on her own, which consumed nearly all of her income. But she was turning 75 that day, and she was going on a cruise to the Bahamas. It turned out that this was no ordinary cruise. It was a luxury ship with swimming pools, casinos, suites, and first-rate cuisine. An environment frequented only by the very wealthy and, in this case, an older woman who had saved for years to afford the fare. It would be Edith's first visit to a location she had seen only on TV and the internet. She didn't know what to expect, but she was determined. When she alighted from the cab and arrived at the port in Miami, she had no idea what to do. She looked around for signs or employees who might assist her, but all she saw were happy, well-dressed people surrounded by friends or family. They all seemed to know exactly where they were going, as if boarding a luxury cruise was something they did every day. But neither her age nor the fact that she was alone would discourage her. After all, while being there might feel intimidating, it was also a significant personal achievement for her. It would be her first time traveling outside the country, and being able to do so on that particular luxury cruise ship was something she had yearned for. A bell rang, and boarding queues began to form. There were long lines and shorter ones, but Miss Marshall had no idea what the difference between them might be, so she got into the one closest to her. With each step, she pushed her luggage forward with some effort. Nobody wanted to assist the older woman. Incidentally, she was the most casually dressed person there. She thought she might make some friends, but it didn't seem like anyone wanted to talk to a simple older woman like her. Before giving their tickets to the boarding inspector, everyone in her line had to go through a metal detector. When it came to her, the alarm went off, startling the woman and drawing the attention of every passenger in every row. Edith was very embarrassed, especially when a security guard told her to leave the line and be scanned. The older woman stood there with her arms open as the guard looked for any illegal items she might be carrying. The whispering grew louder as the line stood still. Finally, a young woman remarked, "Had to be an old woman, huh?" The guard then discovered the cause of the alarm's activation. Edith had a bunch of keys hidden in her stocking. Whenever she left the house, whether it was to go to the market or another city, she kept her keys in her socks, and this time was no different. When they saw the older woman taking off her old shoes so the security guard could get the keys from inside her sock, the people in the line started laughing at her and mocking her. Miss Marshall's shame grew, and she felt she had no choice but to stand with her head down. She'd never experienced anything like this before. It was just a key. What was the problem? She was finally able to proceed to the counter where her ticket was checked. The inspector examined her and the document she had proffered. "Are you really Edith Marshall?" he asked, taking her measurements. "Is this really your ticket?" She replied, "Yes," and produced her ID. Appearing incredulous, the inspector summoned a manager. The manager looked at the ticket and then at the elderly lady suspiciously. Once again, the queue was being held up by Miss Marshall. Giggles increased. A few ladies crossed their arms, tapping their feet impatiently. The older woman had no idea why this was happening and could only hope the men would believe her. The manager then suggested, "Okay, you can board, but she's in the wrong line. This is for executive passengers only. It's right there for premium passengers," he explained. The women behind her widened their eyes. "What's going on? How does such a pauper have a premium suite?" said one. "There's something wrong here. Look at her shoes," exclaimed another. Miss Edith was embarrassed by the remark, so she apologized to the manager and went to the other queue, which was much smaller and had even better dressed people. She showed the inspector her ticket and was allowed to board. She was bothered by the judgmental stares, but there was nothing she could do about it. Others didn't even seem to realize that she was there. It was as if she didn't exist at all. The fact is that no one there could imagine what was to come. Miss Marshall had never seen a ship that size before. How was something this giant able to float? However, she had reasons for trusting the cruise ship and the crew running it. She was astounded by it, also unsure of where to go. Where were the upscale suites? She went up to a crew member in uniform standing in one of the hallways. When he saw the older woman wearing just plain clothes and old shoes, he thought she was just a curious low-income tourist. "Madam, these suites are only available to VIP travelers." The crew member turned to her and said, "I suggest you look for your lodgings," turning her attention away from her to smile brightly at a handsome, well-dressed man who also needed assistance. Then Miss Marshall decided to lag behind a group of people who passed her by. It looked like they knew where they were going. She must have been the only redneck in the place who had never been on a cruise. In addition to being poor and appearing poor, she was also an older woman, which made it even more apparent that nobody wanted to be close to her. Miss Edith would try to make a point when someone said something to her, but they would usually be evasive and walk away, leaving her alone once more. Then they arrived at a location marked Executive Suite. This was not where Miss Marshall was supposed to be. The woman started to worry. Her arms were shaking because she'd been trying hard to carry her bags there. She looked at her watch now and then. A young crew member finally noticed how restless the elderly woman looked and offered to take her bags. "I have no idea where my place is, young man," she said humbly. "This cruise is massive." The young man asked to see her ticket and was surprised when she handed it to him. He hadn't expected her to be a premium suite traveler. The young man didn't waste much time passing judgment before picking up Miss Marshall's luggage and escorting her to her room. The country girl from Florida felt lighter now. She was no longer alone and would finally reach her cabin. It looked like everything was going to work out as planned. She followed the young man until they entered a beautiful and opulent area full of other travelers. "Your ticket says you belong here. Now you can follow this line, all right?" the young man told her, leaving her luggage on the ground. "I'll be right back to help you," before he left her to take care of other things. The problem was that the suitcases were left on the floor in the way of other people, and a man who appeared to be a millionaire felt uncomfortable and decided to speak up. "That's all I need. I pay top dollar to stay in a luxurious and peaceful place, and I have to deal with this? Ma'am, why don't you find your cabin and leave us alone?" he said. She tried to counter, "But my ticket is in this very sector, sir." The man just frowned and said it wasn't possible. The sailor returned and observed the ensuing mess. He quickly took Miss Marshall's ticket and showed it to him, confirming what she said. "I can't believe we've reached such a low level. When did the rabble of this country begin to be able to come on a cruise like this?" These words completely shocked Miss Edith, leaving her speechless. She wanted to cry. She had no idea why that man and others were offended by her mere presence. Some people criticized the man for his speech because they felt it was inappropriate to speak in that tone to an older woman. Others, on the other hand, agreed with the man and thought it was absurd to have that type of people in the first class of a cruise ship. "I would like to know how that old woman got here. Was it charity? Did she win a radio giveaway or raffle? Poor people love a raffle, right?" said one person. This hurt Miss Marshall. She could not contain her tears as she put her hands to her face. Finally, a young woman saw what the man did to the elderly woman and came to her strict defense. "Don't you see that she has as much as right to be here as you do? Aren't you ashamed to talk like that to an older woman? Would you talk to her that way if she were your mother?" Suddenly, everyone started to speak. The most expensive wing of the cruise had been turned into an arena, with rich people bickering and attacking each other. Feeling defeated and tired, the older woman left her bags in a corner and walked away from that place. She had given up on finding her quarters. The sailor who had just helped her asked everyone to calm down before approaching the older woman to do the same. Edith's voice was shaky and choked. Finally, the sailor led her to an armchair in the lobby and helped her sit down. At that moment, she let an old photograph fall to the floor. The sailor moved quickly to retrieve it for her. He saw that there was a boy in the picture and handed it back to her. "Madam, this must mean a great deal to you. It wasn't in your luggage or wallet, but in your pocket," he remarked. "You must really like the boy in the photo." Miss Marshall took the picture back and looked at it fondly, stroking the face imprinted on it. Then she smiled for the first time since arriving at the Miami port. "This is my son right here," she proudly replied. "He's a captain. The boy in the picture is in charge of this cruise ship today." Everyone who was arguing stopped when they heard this. Suddenly, they were seized by the mystery that now emanated from the humble old woman who had neither good shoes nor suitable dresses, but was the mother of the most important man on that ship. Then, without taking her eyes off the photo, she began her story. Miss Marshall was from a low-income family in the south of the country. Her parents had a small ranch, and it was thanks to it that they managed to escape hunger during the difficult times of her childhood. Edith was the eldest of 3 children, responsible for their upbringing. Lily was the youngest and in poor health. Edith had lost count of the times she had to miss school to care for her while her mother worked in the fields. A few months after the Pearl Harbor attack, Edith's father had to join the military. After fighting the Japanese, he was sent to the war front in France, where he never returned. However, he had given his oldest daughter a gold pendant that he had inherited from his grandmother before leaving the country. He made Edith promise that she would keep that relic until he returned as a hero, except that the man returned inside a coffin covered with a flag, and Edith could not return him the pendant. After this tragedy, the family was never the same. Until the day she passed away, Edith's mother remained a widow who constantly missed her husband. When Edith was 27, she believed she would never get married. However, it was at that time that Walter, a good-looking, hard-working man in his 30s, the type who gets up early and is neither too serious nor too silly, crossed her path. He knew the area like the back of his hand. Edith only had a little experience with relationships, but she thought Walter was the Prince Charming she deserved, and the man treated her well. They started preparing to get married one year after they first met. However, Edith's life would be upended by another tragedy. One winter, Lily became seriously ill, and Edith assumed she had the flu, but the girl's condition did not improve and she appeared weaker every day. When Walter finally brought in a doctor from town, they discovered that Lily had pneumonia. Walter then took it upon himself to drive the girl to a city hospital in his truck. Lily went into intensive care as soon as she arrived. 2 days later, Walter started feeling weak and having trouble breathing. When he went to the doctor, he discovered that he too had caught the disease, probably while traveling with his sister-in-law. Lily succumbed to her illness on Sunday morning. While Walter fought to stay alive as long as he could, he eventually died. Now just Edith and her mother remained. The only things left were Walter's truck and an old ranch. When Edith started to feel ill, they were both still in mourning. She quickly became aware that she was expecting a child. She wanted so badly to be happy, but she wasn't sure if she was capable of it then. But she carried on with her pregnancy, always relying on the help of her mother, who got weirder as the months went by. After the boy was born, Edith had little genuine happiness to enjoy. Her mother had finally been diagnosed with dementia. Sometimes she just forgot things. At other times, she became aggressive, blaming Edith for the poverty and abandonment in which they lived. Ken, Edith's son, was growing up strong and healthy, much like his father, but his safety was constantly threatened by his grandmother, who had more and more frequent bouts of crying and anger. Living with her mother had become a nightmare for her. So she made the most heartbreaking and difficult decision of her life. Unable to abandon her mother to a miserable and lonely old age, she gave Ken to a young farming couple who couldn't have children. We're here's to a fortune and would give him the safe and complete life she would never give. It was like losing an arm to leave the boy with them, but she had no choice. A few years later, Edith's mother passed away. The women even went back to look for the farmer couple, but they had sold their properties and moved to another continent. Without resources and at a time when even making a phone call was practically impossible, Edith was never able to track the boy. She blamed herself for her choices and never stopped looking for someone who might know something. She just prayed every night that he was alright and would forgive her. Only a short time ago, Edith learned what had happened to Ken. She got help from a nonprofit group to finish a vast screening that finally led to a conclusion. Ken was now the captain of the same luxury cruise ship she was on. The organization assisted her in raising funds for a premium suite ticket so she could be as close to her son as possible. It had been decades since she had waited for this moment, and now she stood in the ship's lobby surrounded by chaos. I still do not know if I will be able to meet with him or what encounter will entail. However, at least I know what happened to him and that he is safe. That's enough for me, Edith stated. I can leave this life now. Everyone around her was silent, savoring every word of her story. Some expressed regret for their comments. Others were in tears. Some individuals were contemplating their own lives up until that point. However, nobody could remain indifferent to the words of the older woman with worn shoes. She was so engrossed in the emotion that she did not notice the sailor who assisted her in leaving the lobby and entering the crew's control room. It didn't take long for a message to be broadcast over the ship's loudspeakers. Please give me a minute of your time, travelers. This is your captain, Ken Marshall. Although our cruise ship has yet to sail away from land, I'm hoping that the next few days at sea will offer you the chance to change your lives. We never travel in a straight line. It's a treacherous road with powerful storms and enormous waves. Because of this, it's essential to be balanced, have a strong hull, and be discerning. I'm trying to say that our lives are not always filled with happy moments. Challenges are part of the crossing, just as waves are part of the ocean. If we never fail, we will never experience the joy of forgiveness. And if we can forgive, then there is no reason to hold a grudge against anyone. And there's one more thing I want to say as the crew's captain. My mother, my birth mother, is on this ship with me and all of you. I could never tell her this, so I'll say it now, and I want her to know. I don't hold a grudge against anything. Absolutely nothing. I forgave her a long time ago. Mom, your decision saved me, and even without knowing you, I've always loved you." Following Captain Ken's remarks, some crew members and passengers started crying. Clapping could be heard throughout the cruise ship's rooms and public spaces. Mrs. Edith's eyes were dripping with tears. A tall, gray-haired man in a sailor's uniform soon showed up in the ship's suite lobby. Edith got to see her son for the first time in more than 45 years. She feared she couldn't handle it, but Ken embraced her quickly. Now they were both shedding tears of pure joy as everyone applauded. Edith took the pendant that had belonged to her father, killed in the war, from her pocket and handed it to her son. It was the last relic of the family. Ken gave Miss Edith one last hug before saying, "I knew you would never give up on me. Thanks for finding me." If you like this story, please leave a thumbs up. Now, this other video on your screen will also move you. So have a good session, and I'll see you in the next video.